Steel yourselves, dear viewers, for tonight on Roll of a Tangent, I, Nikita Zuev, and my co-hosts, Robert Gibson and XJ, shall be unearthing another haunting myth from the seemingly endless library of the Weird Tales magazine. Unlike both of the stories we have reviewed so far, The House on the Brain was not written for the magazine specifically. It was instead created as a standalone work in 1859, around the same time as Pushkin was alive, and later reprinted in the third ever issue of the Weird Tales. Created by Edward Bulwer Lytton, or Lytton, I'm not very sure actually,
Lytton.
Listen, I said it right the first time. Huzzah. Who served as the Secretary of the State for the British colonies at the time of writing and publishing this work. Needless to say, we have stumbled upon a tale of great pedigree. Now let us venture forth into what actually lies within the haunted scripture before us, with a summary. A haunted house off Oxford Street in London catches the narrator's attention after the before-mentioned gentleman hears of the place from a local friend. The owner, who complains of being unable to keep a tenant for more than a few hours, is convinced by the narrator to let him spend the night there. The owner offers the narrator a reward in exchange for exercising the house. Although warned that he may fail, our narrator perseveres. As the night progresses, the narrator's servant is terrorized by something in another room, and as they flee, they leave our hero alone with his dog to fend off for themselves. The paranormal activity intensifies, leading to the sudden and quiet death of the dog. Despite the events, the narrator refuses to leave the house and focuses on locating the source of the otherworldly energy. By conducting detective work, the narrator learns that a child was murdered in the house. The haunted room is dismantled with the owner's help, and a safe is discovered containing strange chemicals, odd apparatus, and a note from a child's murderer. The memo states that the curse of the house will remain forever. However, once the safe is removed and part of the construction is destroyed, the house is wholly exorcised, and the owner can finally let the house, making some good old money. So, that is the tale, The House on the Brain. It is a very unusual tale in some of its aspects. For example, the thing that I haven't mentioned, there are a couple of interludes within the tale where the author, through the guise of the narrator, sort of shares with us his ideas on the supernatural. The idea that the supernatural as a thing on its own is not really the proof of something being extraterrestrial, but actually a point of nature that we just don't understand yet. Something natural that seems unnatural.
Mm.
And there are also plenty of very interesting thoughts within the story itself that get explored. And how well that's done, I'm going to uh, keep for a little bit later. I'm just going to pass the microphone to somebody else so that I'm not hugging it for too long. Robert, what did you think about the
Mm.
tale?
I thought it was quite hard to understand the resolution of the story. That may have been just because I wasn't very intelligent at the time I was reading it. On the other hand, I must say I quite enjoyed it, partly because I think Bulwer Lytton's perhaps been underrated. He's been widely mocked for starting a story with the words "It was a dark and stormy night." That's regarded as a great joke. Well, I don't see that it's that bad to start a story with "It was a dark and stormy night." I mean, if the night's dark and stormy, well, fair enough. Um,
It was
anyway,
a bright and beautiful night. There you go. That's the way I'll
mm,
I
say it.
have to say, That was a TIL moment for me. Today I learned. I didn't know that that was Lytton.
Oh, but you had heard of it.
Yes, of course. It was
Yeah.
just dark and stormy night. Yeah.
Hmm. Anyway, this particular story, I the thing that most interested me actually is what Nikki's mentioned a short while back, because the discussion of natural and supernatural. In fact, quite a few of these weird tales stories seem to involve theoretical discussions, philosophical discussions of that sort. I seem to remember that the last two we had were a bit like that. Um, anyway, this one, he seems to be saying there's really no such thing as supernatural. And indeed, it's a difficult question. What is the difference between paranormal and supernatural? Because that on that issue hangs the momentous question of, is a story science fiction or fantasy? Um, so a big issue. And when I, but anyway, when I finished this story, I didn't have the feeling that I like to have at finishing a story, which is the feeling of having understood it more or less. I didn't really get it, to be quite honest. And it's very rare for me to say something like that about a story. Probably because I usually avoid reading stories that would have that effect on me. But in this case, it was reading it for the podcast, and I'm glad I did. But I'm looking forward to hearing wiser folk elucidate its mysteries and conundrums.
I think before I pass the talk to XJ, in my opinion, I think you're totally right in the sense of there is not that much to understand, to be honest, because the prose itself is not as interesting as the questions that it poses. The interludes that I mentioned, that I wanted to mention after the summary, are the most interesting parts of them,
Hmm.
of the entire tale. Everything else in the tale is, you could watch it on TV right now, like House Hunters, some dudes going into the house with camera that shakes sometimes. Oh my god, the chair moved. Oh, like the dog's dead. Oh, it's not really that exciting. And the ending, like it really wants to have this situation in which, oh, this huge revelation has transpired because there were clues beforehand in the first part of the story. um but it really doesn't. It really, even if you understand it, it's like, oh, okay, well, I guess that's what happened, right? It's very
Hmm.
disappointing, really, in that essence. And it's funny to me because this is the first tale that we read that comes from an established author in the Weird Tales that wasn't submitted, and I think it's the worst one, in my opinion. I think it's worse than, um, oh god, um, what are the other two that we reviewed? I'm forgetting.
The Ghoul and the
The Ghoul and the
Corpse,
Corpse.
and then
Yes.
the other one is
The Conquering Will. There we go. The
yes,
Conquering Will. I
yes.
remember
Oh
that.
yeah, I like the
Yeah. So
Conquering Hill. I think that's the best one
yeah,
so far that we've
yeah, for
found.
sure, for sure. Yeah, but I think if we went toe to toe, the Ghoul and the Corpse versus this story, if it wasn't for the interludes that ask interesting questions, if you just take the story as the story, the Ghoul and the Corpse punches this guy in the face and he falls down the first round. Like,
Hmm.
it's a non-contester kind of boxing match.
Hmm.
Anyway, actually, what did you think about this, Dan?
Um, I'm gonna go right out and say that my feelings on this particular story is probably very unfair to Mr. Lytton. And I'll explain why in a second. So first, I found this story to be very difficult to work through. It is a very slow read. The word that floated in my mind more than a few times when I was reading it was a slog. um, it doesn't have anything to do with the prose, the language itself, because I actually quite like the prose. It has that diction that I'm very partial to, like the old English way of speaking that I quite like. It is a slog to me because of exactly the opposite of what my co-hosts think, which is that second section, that interlude section where you start talking about discussing whether it was whether the supernatural should be part of the natural world or not. And this part is when it will become very unfair to Mr. Lytton, because this has more to do with myself than the way he structured his story. So first, I think that particular section suffers from the same fate, same issue as the Coiled Serpent, in which the world building is given in a huge chunk. Probably would have been better if it's spread out through the story. But second, consistently, I think I have been a person who doesn't really like it when the author's own prejudices is not quite the right word, his own philosophy,
Opinions?
opinions becomes too center stage in the story, and this came across as that to me. And I'm going to just take the hit that this is all me, that it might just be me reading it that way. Let's go back to my childhood. No. But actually, yes. I grew up in a place where we pay a lot of attention to racial harmony, and every piece of drama that came out on television that is locally made has to have one Chinese, one Malay, and one Indian. And it has to represent all the races and a bunch of other stuff as well. I'm just bringing up one example.
So if there are villains, do you have to have three villains? One Malay, one Chinese.
Pretty much, if there are villains, they have to be equally represented. So it just became like over the years, it just become like really obvious when the state is trying to put their opinions through, and I just grew distasteful of stories that were written in a way where the author is trying to push their narrative. Like, I don't care what you think, Mr. Author. If it's done skillfully, I don't have an issue with it. But if it comes out too obvious, then it's a immediate turn off for me, and I will take the hit that I might be reading this too sensitively. But that section, that explanation came out too much as if Mr. Lytton himself, that's what he thinks, and he's using his character, the narrator in the story, as a vehicle to explain what he thinks. And whenever an author does that, I become uninterested. The other thing that I feel would be unfair for me, but it is how I feel about the story, is that so first, I have to say, given that this is written 150 years ago, Mr. Lytton probably is a trailblazer. He, like Nikki said, the genre that he's writing in is basically the supernatural investigative fiction. You see it in the TV series literally named Supernatural. It started off that way. Bunch of ghost hunters trying to discover the origins of some demons. Many episodes of Ghostbusters were written that way, the cartoon, not the movie. Or even the first movie itself, actually, first and second movie. You have a bunch of people trying to investigate the supernatural origins of some particular thing. The Ring, which is a amazing piece of Japanese horror movie, is also done in the same way. So Mr. Lytton is probably a trailblazer in that regard, but it is also the way he did it in this particular story falls flat for me. It was very boring. I didn't care towards the end what actually happened, because I could totally see that the last lady who lived in the house probably had something to do with the haunting. It was quite clear about a third of the way through, not a third, like after the world building section, the interlude, it was very clear to me that she and her paramour absolutely murdered somebody, and that's why the spirit stayed in the house. Although I have no idea who was it that was killed, but the conclusion of the story was very evident, like pretty much halfway through the story. And then and the ending then just kind of fell flat. But again, I want to say, at 150 years ago, when people read the story, it might have been different, because he is a trailblazer. By the time I got to read it, though, I've had years and years and decades of all this this particular genre build up, so it didn't come as a surprise. That's my take.
I don't know if he was a trailblazer or not. I wouldn't be so bold to say that yes or no in that aspect. So I'll leave that point mute. But I will say that when it comes to scares, I don't think you could one way or the other say that they worked or didn't work. I think it's all about the exposure, right? Like that actually is talking about. If you've been exposed to so much horror, at some point you'd be like, oh yeah, and that's from The Ring. And this is from Night, like Night of the Werewolves. That's Friday the 13th right there, right? It's horror is all about surprise, and surprise is very hard to achieve when you've read a lot of horror or consumed a lot of material, right? Because a lot of material takes horror-like traits in order to enhance.
I don't know, because the atmosphere for what was that other horror story that we read, the something to do with the heart,
The
Lost Hearts?
Lost Heart. That was that the sense of dread in those pages were pretty good, and even some of I feel like an idiot because the name isn't coming to my mind.
Don't worry, we agree. Yeah, what's the
Don't remember that.
Dunwich Horror. Who wrote it?
Dunwich Horror, yeah.
Dunwich Horror
That-
was written by H.P. Lovecraft.
Right. Jesus, I feel so stupid.
Yeah, no,
man.
never
Like, the
mind. I do
word
agree with you.
Oh yeah. I'm glad you agree with me.
I wanted to make a point actually about Lost Hearts. So Lost Hearts was only written like 40 years later, 30 years later. It's a much better story. It's much better, it's much more well paced. It's got interesting ideas in it. It's got pseudoscience in it. But so does this story. And the pseudoscience in this story, although like the interlude does make it interesting on proposing some ideas about what is natural, what is unnatural. Like XJ, just for a very different reason. I don't really consider it as part of the story, right? They're very two different things for me. The interlude itself, I could have, he could have put the interlude at the beginning and be like, imagine a world in which the unnatural and natural are basically the same. It is you who's making the mistake as to, make a distinction between them. It is just, the unnatural is just the natural that you don't understand. That would have been good enough. Literally, that would have been good enough. And then you could have had the story within, have the narrator come to terms with the idea, like, no, there must be an explanation. Something that I don't understand doesn't necessarily mean it can't exist, right? And so on and so forth. But yeah, so it is rather sloppy. I have to say it. I mean, Lytton, he has a reputation. He is mocked in some areas of the world. Apparently, it's funny because in Russia we have a very different one. I can't remember exactly who's the author, but the lines are, the years went by. It was getting dark. That's the way that story begins, and people make fun of that one, which now that I've heard it 1,000 times, someone else say it, like the years went by, it was getting dark. Now I find it humorous, but when I first started to hear that phrase, just like Robert said about it was a dark and stormy night. The first time you hear it, it's like, ooh, that's an opening. But yeah, if you hear it 1,000 times, you're like, okay,
Mm.
all right, got it, cool. So just like with this tale, when it comes to the nitty gritty, the focus of it, I think it loses a lot of that. I mean, it already didn't have a lot of momentum, I must say. I have to say it suffers a lot from pacing. And it kind of, you know, our author decided to look at the pacing and said, like, you know what? This is too fast. Let's kill it. And then he puts the interlude in, and then the pace is just dead, and then he attempts to come back into the tale with dead pace, and it just sort of like crumbles into pieces. And I understand why Robert didn't understand the ending. It's confusing as hell. It's written confusingly, even for the
Mm.
time. The
Mm.
the words are put in a very interesting. That's a very generous way of saying it. In a very interesting manner, and yeah, it's just sad. Honestly, I wish it was better. And it's so
Mm.
interesting that the Weird Tales decided to be like, all right, this is a classic of horror. Let's put it in. And the first classic of horror that they put in that we review, phew, you know,
Mm.
it's a tough one.
It
Mm.
could just be a matter of them padding their publication, I suppose. They just found something. Oh, we have this. Might as well just put it in.
I mean, I
Yeah.
don't know by whom. I don't know by whom. I haven't met these people, but this is considered a classic. I don't know by whom. I don't know these. I don't know the dudes who came together and decided. Maybe it's because it was written by this guy, by the secretary of the colonies, that it was considered a classic. But
Could be.
Mm.
I don't know.
Yeah. Or perhaps the person who chose it likes Bovril because, it's
Bovril?
thanks, it's thanks to Bulwer Lytton that Bovril is called Bovril because he wrote this book called The Coming Race, which I'd quite like to read one day. I haven't been able to get it. But anyway, there's an underground race of people who are sustained by a special force called Vril. And the makers of
Huh?
Bovril read this book and decided to call it Bovril. Anyway,
Really?
I see. I see.
That
but
is that is another TIL
yeah, I
moment
thought
for me.
yeah. One other thing I'd like to say about this story, which I found perhaps one of the more interesting aspects of it, and that is the narrator's keenness to sleep in a haunted house. He really seems to be a kind of thrill seeker, sort of compulsive thrill seeker. Uh, I don't think he's one of these people who want to debunk the supernatural. He just thinks of it as source of excitement. And he says to his servant at one stage, "Do you remember how in Germany how disappointed we were at not finding a ghost in that old castle, which was said to be haunted by a headless apparition?" So it's not the only time we went around looking for this sort of thing. Um, quite an interesting psychological case.
Well, yeah. I think I just to completely deviate from the point that you just brought up. I actually want to talk about the ending of the story a little bit. Um, like part of the reason why it fell flat for me is because I don't know what the point of all that discussion, that description about the special compass and the very very obviously occult um, uh, equipment that is found in the sealed off basement or something like that was for. Like we got hints that it has something to do with the spirits in the house,
Mm-hmm.
but it was never really made clear, or I might have missed it when I read it. Who set
Mm.
it all up? Why did the person set it up? And what did it have to do with the ghost? Now, the what it's not such a big issue, but I did, and again, I might have just missed it because it was such a difficult read for me. Uh, who and
Right.
why they did it.
All right, I'm gonna do my best to explain it. So this is to me, right? This is what it reminds. This is a classical Russian joke. There are three dudes. They got so drunk on vodka that they don't even remember the name of the train station that they need to get to. But one guy remembers one third, one guy remembers the other third, and then the last guy remembers the last third. And when they come to the police officer to tell him, they say it in the wrong order, and it sounds like, excuse me for the language, Robert, go suck some. You know, right? It's gonna be a difficult journey because we're trying to piece. I read the thing thrice, and I'm still telling you I have no clue exactly. But from what I understand, there was a sailor, the sailor from America. He was kind of like a pirate, kinda. That's from the story. He was almost a pirate. What does that mean? What does that mean? Huh? Could somebody tell me what does almost a pirate mean? And then he married this woman. Stuff.
Clearly, he was a part-time pirate.
It was yeah. Which got people upset on this family side of this woman who he married, and some terrible stuff happened. He killed somebody in the family, and this was his house. And when he bought this house, he made an additional construction in the house, that secret room. And in the secret room, he had all of the stuff in it, which was his memorabilia. He was maybe a mage because he had this cup and this other stuff, So whatever, he had all these powerful artifacts in a safe, and he was hiding it from somebody, I guess, in the secret room. That's why and how.
Which is very strange to me because, so first of all, so yes, he is a part-time pirate, and then he caught the eye of this woman who married him against her family's wishes. More than that, though, the woman, her brother died, I believe, and then sent his orphaned offspring was sent to under the care of the woman. They ill-treated the kid, caused his death, so that the inheritance of the brother, who was quite well off, would come to the woman. And the man then absconded. Not clear if he took the money. I don't think so, because the woman retained her wealth for a time, but they became cursed. And then I don't know what happened after that.
Right.
So it's like there is more than one ghost in the house, more than a few people who had a bone to pick with the part-time pirate, and the woman kind of suffered collateral damage, I suppose. And yeah, this is very hard to make out what the story was about and the ending.
Yeah,
Well,
I mean, yeah. Sorry, what were you gonna say, Robert?
I was just going to say, I hope the viewers are tempted to have a go for themselves.
Yeah, honestly, it's no. You know what, Robert? Most of the
Mm.
time, when something is bad, I wouldn't be recommending it to people. But I think you should read The House on the Brain. You should read it for two reasons. You should, number one, for some reason, somebody considers this a classic. So maybe you will be the one who can join their little cult to be like, oh yeah, I get it. And then number two, if you're in the normal people realm who read this and go like, what? You can learn so much on how not to do a story. Don't set up your pace based on the what's it called, the unfurling investigation, and then stop the investigation midway with some. By the way, I had some thoughts, guys. So let me just write that down on the page. Number two, don't create a situation in which the resolution of the tale, which your clues should bring forth to, all of these instances, all of the previous information when it all comes together, nobody understands it, right? Start with the conclusion. If you're writing a detective story, start with the conclusion and then take the clues from there and put it in. There might be other ways to do it, but this is the only way I found how to write a detective story and actually have it make any sense. Have the conclusion first. Take the clues out of the conclusion. Put them throughout the story. This to me seems like a bunch of stuff was written, a bunch of crazy ideas were taken into the tale, and then the ending was like, and now we're gonna take all of those crazy ideas and then use all of them. There was no red herrings. There was no thing that you were like, that didn't really match, but it was actually a clue for something else. It is a story of a ghost story written by somebody who doesn't know what's fun about a ghost story. Okay? So I don't. That's why I was like so apprehensive about being like, is he a trailblazer? Like right. If you're the guy who made the first car, but your car doesn't run, I don't think you made the first car. I think you made an idea that the first car could exist. If indeed he was the first one to create horror
I mean,
stories like that.
fair enough. I
So
guess
I'm being too critical here.
I mean I called him a trailblazer because I could see a lot of the beats that later horror investigative genre of works, if I can even call it a genre, later take notes from, which is you have this investigation and then you have this undigging of the past, and then you break into some place or the other, and then you find all this stuff that is supposed to point to how it all began. And that's what Lytton had, except that what didn't work for me was it was pointing at nothing. Like I couldn't see what the direction it was pointing
Well,
at.
yeah, if if at the end of the tale you're sitting there and being like, so what was the ending? Like, you're like, what? What are we doing here? What's the point of this? Right? It's kind of why I'm sorry I come back to this again, but the Guile of Sphere, my favorite story of all time. It's the same. It was the same feeling for me. Like not as bad, obviously, right? Like I'm not comparing Guile of Sphere quality of writing to this. Like no. I'm talking about the same type of disappointment, because I was like, well, I kind of feel like the story's about nothing, and here it's kind of similar. Like, all right, so we put all these clues together. What now, author? What are we? It's over. All right.
I mean,
cool.
at least in Guile of Sophia, you could point to an ending. It was like, okay, it might be about nothing, but I know how the story ended. This one, like, I'm like, what?
I tried to when I did the summary for this tale, I tried to do kind of a similar thing where and now the person who used to own the house can make money on it. Because that's kind of the end of the story. That is the end of the story. It's like, all right, all is well. Capitalism wins again. Like, what are we talking about?
Yeah, I think I prefer the ending to Lytton's novel, The Last Days of Pompeii, because there's no question about what happens at the end of that story. Vesuvius blows up and destroys the city. It's much clearer.
I mean, he couldn't really stray from that, is my opinion. But he could have been writing an alternative history.
That's true. The Last Days of Pompeii. It is something I want to read, and maybe I will understand the house on the brain after reading
maybe
that.
If you read that, I'm not going to, but if you read that, perhaps you would understand the genius of Lytton.
That's right. Yeah. Why his tales are considered classic. Right. So I think. All right. Here's my sequel.
Well, hang on.
This definitely needs one. Yeah. So go for it, Nikki.
All right. So the narrator goes to a different country, right? So this prelude where he talked about being in the castle, he goes there because people have heard about the Oxford Street case. That's what it's called now, the Oxford Street case. And the first stop that he makes is what is it called? Is this, the snack before the actual story? He's in the middle of the investigation. There's this situation ongoing in the Tsar's museum in Moscow, and he's running around the exhibits, trying to catch this individual. He gets him, and it turns out that this is just some guy who wanted to steal an art piece. So he's rather disappointed, and we find out that it's been 6 years since the Oxford Street case, and he's been trying to find more of the natural unnatural, right? He's been going around the all across Europe trying to find something, and each time it just wasn't the same. It just was somebody pretending, or something being misunderstood that was so natural that there's no question about it once you see the facts. And then he gets an invitation to Wallachia.
Sorry,
And he
where
has
was that again?
Wallachia.
Wallachia.
You'll know.
Okay.
You will find out in a second. Don't worry. So he goes to Wallachia, and there's this beautiful old castle there, and a man opens it up, and it says like, so what's the mystery? And the guy's like, there is no mystery. We're just here to learn a little bit about you, what kind of things you've been doing and stuff. And throughout the course of the situation, the narrator meets Count Dracula. That's where Wallachia is, right? Wallachia is where Count Dracula used to reside and so forth. Right, and he gets to speak with him, and we find out that Count Dracula is a man of science first. He's not just this spooky guy walking around, but he has figured out things. He's an alchemist. It's just that, unfortunately, the way he needs to get to these things, to immortality, is towards terrible means. And he wants to know what happened to that safe. He knows about that safe all the way from the Oxford Street, because he knows that there was a cup inside. There was a cup that he really needed. And he's very curious to know if this narrator of ours, I'd probably give him a name, right? Because we have to spend with him much more time. We'll call him
Z.
Brad
Z.
Pitt.
Z.
Z. Okay, fine. Z. His name is Z.
Because
Z for
that's how all the characters are named, right? There's
that's true. That's
the
true. That's
letter
true.
and then underscore.
Yeah, but I think if we called Count Dracula Count D, like, I think people just would not understand what's coming.
I think Count D is probably going to be very obvious.
But maybe inappropriate in some ways. So Z, all right, I'll take Z. Z confesses that this cup, is still some, like, as an exponent, basically in his little shop in London. But he's not willing to give it to the Count because he doesn't know why he wants it. Like, it's kind of weird. And the third act of the tale is this fight of the Count trying to convince our narrator that no, there is the supernatural, while fully knowing that the like, his research is correct, right? Like, so our narrator is right, but he's trying to convince him through fright, through extortion, through things, from quote unquote undead coming to life, and so on and so forth, and being like, look, I am all powerful. You can't fight me. I can do all these things. So he's like narratively trying to convince him by basically throwing all the stuff that he has in his castle, and Z at the end of the tale runs away. He runs away into the Romanian outskirts, only to be met by Dr. Frankenstein. There you go. And there's the stuff for the sequel. Of the sequel.
I really like that idea. It's basically a big crossover.
That's right, because that's the only way you can salvage this whole thing, if I'm honest.
All
by
right.
throwing in interesting characters.
All right. So, any last words from us?
Uh,
No.
man,
So,
score. If I was his English teacher, right? If he gave this to me, my score would be ungraded. Okay, that's not very fair. That's not very fair. Some instances of authorship is clearly seen that the way he turns a phrase in the interlude, in the part that isn't the story, is quite interesting. Um, yeah, the rest needs work. The story needs work. The actual plot needs some work. The characterization needs some plot. Some work. For 3 out of 10. 3 out of 10. If I'm being honest.
Robert? Minus
I
2 out of 0.
I think I'd give it 2.5 actually.
Oh my God! This is the first time in recorded history that Robert has given a lower score than me. Could you explain your score if you could?
Well, I was going to give it 3, but then I thought, well, partly the reason why I was going to give such a high score as 3 is that I actually rather like Bulwer Lytton, but I like him because of his other things, in particular because of The Last of the Barons, which greatly interests me in its portrayal of the Wars of the Roses. And that's not really fair because this story is different, so nothing to do with that. So I took half a point off.
Fair enough. All right, XJ, what's your score?
Same as yours. 3.
3 out of 10. Okay.
Such a difficult read, man.
Yeah. But hey, actually, out of the 3 tales that we have examined for the Weird Tales, extra bonanza, the 2 tales that were actually written for the magazine have been good. So that's kind of funny, huh?
Mm-hmm.
That the one that they decided to like reprint wasn't that good.
I think the only one that's really good though is the one about the conquering will.
Yeah, the Conquering Will is a great story for sure. I'm not saying the Ghoul and the Corpse is fantastic, but it's readable. Unlike this.
It's like a nice snack to have on a afternoon.
Exactly, yeah.
This one is just like a a terrible one.
Yeah, it's a fight. It's a definite fight to put in your mouth, yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, I guess that's the end for the House and the Brain.
Yeah. Resounding review, as you can see, we really all want you to
Yes,
read it.
amazing. We do actually. I do want the listeners to read it, for different reasons though than Nikki has outlined. Maybe one of you can actually tell me what it really is about. All right, and with that happy note, thank you for listening, and join us again next week. Later.